Welcome back to my audit classroom. I'm Sid Bundy, and today we're talking about audit strategy. Specifically, we're going to look at the trade-off between control testing and substantive testing. Before we get started, let's take a moment to remember that in a risk-based audit, our audit strategy is determined by our assessment of risk. We know that audit risk is a function of inherent risk, control risk, and detection risk. The goal of any audit strategy is to provide enough evidence through audit procedures to keep overall audit risk at an acceptable level, that is, at a low level. So then it makes sense to take the audit risk function and solve it for detection risk. It's our determination of detection risk that will set in motion the trade-off between control testing and substantive testing. Remember that detection risk should really be thought of as non-detection risk. It's the probability that an audit will not detect a material misstatement. The double negative in that concept can throw students off a little bit, but we can simplify this by thinking about the trade-off in terms of control risk only. After all, inherent risk is largely out of our control, so control risk is the part of the overall audit risk formula that we will focus on. Auditors make their initial assessment of control risk during the planning phase of an audit using the Coso Framework. The Coso Framework establishes 5 components that form the foundation for sound internal controls. Those components are control environment, risk assessment, control activities, information and communication, and monitoring. Let's take another look at the inverse relationship between detection risk and control risk. Let's start by assuming a company has a material misstatement hidden in their financial records. We call this assumption professional skepticism. If that company has good internal controls and there's a low probability that their own controls wouldn't detect and correct this misstatement, then the flip side of this is that our audit procedures are less likely to catch a misstatement that's already slipped through strong controls. So when control risk is low, the probability of non-detection risk is high. We have many tools and techniques to use to gather evidence. Matching audit procedures to specific assertions is part of designing an effective audit. Collectively, this group of procedures and the amount or level of testing performed is known as audit strategy. SAS 78 requires auditors to perform at least some control testing during the planning stage of every audit. These procedures test the operation of internal controls and include inspection, observation, reperformance, recalculation, and confirmation. It might seem counterintuitive, but when control risk is low, auditors do more control testing. Think of it this way. We're going to rely more on these controls, so we need to make sure they work every time. If we discover during the planning phase that the probability of control failure is high, we won't trust them, so there's no reason to really test them further. When most people think about audit procedures, they think about vouching, tracing, and reconciliations, and these are part of the arsenal for substantive testing. Substantive testing involves the detailed examination of the source documents that support accounting records. Just like in the test of controls, at least some substantive testing are required during the audit. For example, AUC 329 requires substantive testing for analytical procedures, and SAS 12 requires substantive testing to identify significant risks of fraud. Substantive tests are also required for period-end financial reporting processes. So there's a trade-off. When control risk is low, we do lots of tests of controls, but fewer substantive tests. And when control risk is high, we do very few tests of controls and more substantive testing. The relative proportion of tests of controls and substantive testing is known as the overall audit strategy. And this trade-off can change as we adjust and modify our assessment of risk throughout the audit. I hope this quick little diagram has helped clarify the inverse relationship between control and detection risk, and how that relationship drives the inverse relationship between control and substantive testing within the audit strategy. That's it for this time. If you have any questions about this video or any others, please email me at sbundy@tentech.edu.